Welcome. Welcome to The New Terrain, a conversation series where we map leadership in a changing world. Through this series, we'll be exploring the trends that are shaping the future of work, the problems that businesses face, and ultimately how to unlock resilience and impact as leaders. This is a three-part series, and we're exploring the rise of AI, the dynamics of intergenerational workplaces, and how businesses can stay connected to purpose and their people while navigating these challenges and this rapidly changing landscape. I'm Anique. I'm the co-founder of Gather and Grow, and I'm joined by my fellow co-founder Leah and our treasured partner Rebekah, the founder of Beautiful Soup. Each of us have a unique perspective on purpose, leadership, and systems. And through these candid conversations, we're going to uncover actionable insights to help you lead with clarity, compassion, and above all, purpose. Our hope is that these conversations are a roadmap for you and help you thrive in the face of change. So let's get started. I'm your host for today's conversation. Hello and welcome. And again, I'm joined by Rebekah and Leah. Hello to you both.
Hello.
Hello. All right, let's jump in. Today, we're discussing the leadership evolution through the frame of Gen Z, authority, and the future of work. And the idea here is that Gen Z is entering the workforce with really fresh perspectives. They have high expectations for purpose driven work and a desire for empathy and understanding. And while this sounds pretty general and human, this is something quite fresh for leaders and organizations right now. These are a kind of a different set of expectations from this Gen Z group. So at the same time that these folks are entering the workforce in droves, AI is really disrupting these traditionally entry level roles and leaving many young people struggling to find meaningful opportunities. So we want to dive a bit deeper into how leaders can adapt and engage and empower this generation while creating these sustainable revenue generating opportunities for the people and their companies. Let's get into it. I think what's really interesting about Gen Z is that they're entering the workforce with a totally different relationship to authority than past generations. We've had a bit of a conversation about this already, but they've grown up questioning systems. They really value equality, and they're not afraid to ask why when something doesn't make sense. And for leaders, that can really feel like pushback and feel like something a little different when it comes to culture and how to manage this generation. But it's actually an invitation to lead with curiosity rather than that command and control and fear based culture. So, Rebekah, I want to start with you, our purpose guru. I know purpose is such a huge part of what Gen Z is seeking. So, why do you think purpose has become such a non negotiable for them? And how can businesses authentically connect to their mission and to those values?
Mm. Thanks, Anique. I think one of the things that's really interesting is how Gen Z see purpose as part of their identity. And when you kind of roll that into turning up for work every day, it's got to feel more than just a paycheck. And so when I think about previous generations, I think of myself starting out work in the early 2000s. We compartmentalized. I had my work persona, I had my persona with my friends, I had my family persona, even. We played lots of different roles and wore lots of different hats. And for Gen Z, there aren't those lines or their barriers. They're coming up and they're showing up as their full selves, which I kind of really respect. And it's exciting and it's authentic. And what that means, though, is the work that they're doing. I've said before, when they've got this one precious life and businesses are asking them to show up for 40 hours a week and to contribute and to care about the work that they're doing, then it has to have meaning for them. Because whereas previous generations, and myself included, there might have been a feeling of, you're not meant to like work. It doesn't matter if you like work. That's irrelevant, or if it has meaning to you. It's entirely the opposite for Gen Z. And it's
Yes, yes.
actually a sense of betrayal to themselves if they don't have a sense of connection to the work that they're doing. There's no separation. So I think that's one of the key things and insights to really understand is this sense of purpose as their identity. And then there's the authenticity imperative, as I'm calling it, whereby Gen Z has grown up with social media. They can see a performative post a mile away And they don't want to hear or see corporates talking about making a difference. They actually want to see real impact. And so they're going to get investigative. They're going to actually do the checks and balances, taking a look at your diversity and leadership, taking a look at your supply chain, taking a look at your environmental footprint, all of those things, which I don't know, when I was in my 20s, I was even thinking about that. Some of this stuff we didn't even have the language for. Like it wasn't important. It didn't exist in the same way. And so there's that element of you have to be true and authentic in what you're doing because they're going to check. You can't just talk about it. You have to live by it.
I absolutely love that. Leah, is there anything you want to add?
Yeah, one of the things that I've seen in that kind of wholehearted enthusiasm that Gen Z brings to the table is just a willingness towards messy action. And that's something that I know that us in our generation, right, we cringe at that. We were so used to kind of being kept behind the curtains and having to polish everything until it was 100% done. And that just doesn't exist anymore. But the one thing that I've noticed that's really kind of a disconnect between leaders and Gen Z is that the Gen Z, they're so willing to just be out there that they're not really thinking quite yet about whether or not they have the critical thinking skills or the strategic value that they're adding that actually advances the conversation. They're willing to just go out there and do messy work, which is valuable, but there's still skills that need to be built in addition to that. And that is one of the things that I've seen that's really caused a lot of friction between leaders and this younger workforce is, the workforce is like, I don't want to do entry level work. I don't want to do grunt work. And it's not really about that from our perspective. It's really about building skills and developing skills so that you can contribute meaningful work. Technology has made it so easy to contribute volumes, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's good. And so being able to find a connection between that willingness and the capacity to really be strategic thinkers is something that's really going to be an evolving discussion, I think, between the older workforce and the younger one for us to find a happy medium.
I like that. It builds a really nice bridge to one of the other topics we wanted to talk about today. Rebecca, I think I might come back to you for this one, but the idea of kind of preparing Gen Z for this workforce shaped by AI. You really set that up beautifully, Leah. We can't really ignore that it's totally reshaping these entry points for this part of the workforce. And many of the classic entry level jobs, the roles that came to young professionals to help them get the foot in the door, are being automated. And that's real. So it raises a really big question. How do we prepare them to thrive in a world where those old stepping stones they may have thought were there aren't there anymore? So, Rebekah, I wanted to get back to you. What kind of from a purpose and that societal impact lens, what role can businesses play in addressing these challenges for young workers? And Leah, I want to hear you expand on this more too. Rebekah, you kick us off.
Again, I think it's often recognizing where the opportunities are in these challenges. So, for a lot of people in the older generations, the advent of AI and all of that stands for, and there's a lot of fear mongering and a lot of kind of lack of understanding, or some people are just kind of switched off from it. Actually, for Gen Z, again, they're open to it, they're excited about it. And it's more around how can businesses support them to work with AI. We've spoken before around AI plus human. And I think that that's where this real opportunity is. And for businesses to understand that, okay, if young people exiting the education system are showing up and aren't doing the kinds of jobs, entry level, admin, all those kinds of things that was the traditional route, kind of climbing the career ladder. If a lot of the output is now being automated, then we need to be training our young workers in a completely different way, giving them tools to really understand how to utilize AI so that they're AI managers rather than being replaced by it. I think there's work to be done around critical thinking, and it's
It's
work
nice.
that our education system isn't delivering. When I was prepping for our conversation today, I was thinking, oh, that's a topic for another day for us three, because education and the future of work, they're completely connected. And if the education system isn't actually supporting our young people into working with AI, then that's a failure point right there. But as I said, that's a different conversation. So I'm excited. I was reading about the idea of AI apprenticeships. There's this opportunity to come away from the fear. And I also feel that for a lot of people, currently in work, or, millennials and Gen X, there's kind of this fear around, am I allowed to say that I'm using AI? What are the rules of engagement here? And again, for Gen Z, that's the same thing, because perhaps if they've been at university, they've been told, do not use AI in your dissertation. And so there's a moment here where I think we need to have some clarity around rules of engagement, where we are saying that we're using it. These are the ways in which we're using it, but upskilling, training Gen Z and upskilling other generations to use this in the best way for the businesses that you're working in. And of course, in an ethical way too. So those are some of the things. I just feel like there's lots of opportunities there, but we need to get really honest and confident, leadership does, to kind of
Yes, yes.
steer the path forward.
Yeah, absolutely. We talk a lot about the concept of freedom within the frame. That's something that Anique and I talk to a lot of our clients about. And what that is really creating enough of a framework for someone to have clear expectations, to know what the rules are, to understand why we're doing something to begin with, but then to leave a little bit of space for creativity, to let somebody's individual styles or methodologies or neurodiversity or other kind of considerations that are just so much more welcome into a diverse way of thinking about work that didn't exist before. And so being able to strike that balance between being super clear on why are we doing this? What does good look like at the end of the day? And then being able to leave a little bit of space for iteration and experimentation and God forbid failure, right? Letting the team be able to really understand what it looks like to be able to iterate, learn those lessons, and then do something better the next time. That's something else that's going to be really, really important in this moment of being able to strike that balance between what does enough structure look like and how do we galvanize the team, regardless of whether they're just starting out or if they're more experienced, to be able to come together to be able to deliver something that really satisfies the need of this current moment.
I love that. It's getting into a bit of the more practical side, which I think is a really helpful next step for our conversation around how leaders need to evolve. Because what you're talking to there is like the freedom in the frame is not set by Gen Z, it's set by their leaders. And so just that one concept alone, it's like we have to lead by example of what we need and what we want. Because I am working a lot in the leadership side of things, one thing that I'm kind of really noticing is a huge shift in leadership models. So this idea of leading with fear and blame and hierarchy are really losing their grip for all of our generations, but definitely for Gen Z. So the leaders who are really going to thrive with Gen Z, which is predominantly their majority of their workforce now, are the ones who lead with empathy and practice transparency and collaboration, which we talked a bit about in our first conversation. They don't want to be told what to do. They want to understand the bigger picture and feel like they're a part of shaping it. Leah, you're our systems guru. What are some of the kind of practical steps that leaders and businesses can take to move away from those old models and actually create space for Gen Z to feel engaged and be motivated in their roles?
We've talked about it in so many different contexts, but it applies to the systems too. Really understanding why. Understanding why and understanding what good looks like are the two non negotiables in this moment. There's so much of a willingness to just overshare and overconnect and over everything. Like it's just kind of standard for this younger generation who's had their entire life broadcast to not really have that filter between what is kind of what we would have viewed as acceptable to bring to work versus what is now, right? People are really integrating their entire lives, and there's value to that. But there also is the need to be able to set constructs, to be able to increase boundaries, to be able to allow leaders to be able to coach in a way that is just as boundaried, where they are leaving no room for interpretation of what expectations are and what they look like. And so casual learning opportunities have gone to the wayside with our leaning into more technology and more remote work. You used to be able to kind of get those norms regulated in an office place, and it doesn't exist like that anymore. And so one of the things that we need to be really clear about is what the expectations are when it comes to things like communication. And how do we communicate with each other? How do we collaborate with each other? How do we, if we're in a service industry, how do we talk to our customers and our clients and be able to model that so that there's clarity in those expectations. And the other thing is just really making it clear to be able to show how skills can be developed, right? Like you said, stepping stones earlier, that's something that's really important as well. People need to be able to see what the path is in front of them. They're not just going to do a task because they've been assigned. They need to be able to see the fact that this is actually a building block in developing important skills. And once you do this kind of task, it lets you expand and unlock into things that are further down the road. And so having that clarity in both what's expected from a communication and a collaboration perspective is really important, but it's also equally important to be able to show that kind of transparency and how skills build and for there to be mentorship opportunities that are really intentionally built into the development of this group. Because again, when we were younger, when we were starting out in our careers, we were working 10 hours a day. And none of us want to go back to that world, but you absorbed so much knowledge from just being around people who had more experience. And so we have to be able to replicate that in a really intentional way. It's more challenging because we've all forgotten how to do that remotely. And so it's going to be an interesting thing for us to be able to continue to figure out where that line is and how it can still be authentic, even if it's remote.
Yeah, and I think following on from, kind of rounding the circle, it's the contribution piece and having clarity around the mission, whatever it might be for the business. That really resonates with Gen Z as well, because they want to know these tasks that I'm doing today, which might kind of sometimes seem random, or if I can't make sense of how my contribution or this work that I'm doing actually feeds into us being successful in the overall mission that I've signed up to, that's the reason I'm staying here, then again, that's another kind of risk for a disconnect. And so it's for leadership to make sure that those different touch points and that kind of route towards this is why we're doing this work, these are the reasons that we're showing up, then that gives a sense of empowerment and understanding to Gen Z, which will, really encourage them to want to give their all, and they can see what the value of their contributions.
It's so true. Once you kind of invite people into the journey and help them see how they can contribute to the growth, it has such a positive impact on their individual experience, but then also the culture of the whole group. So I love that. It's a really good one.
I have one more thing that you just mentioned that I think is really important to mention. There's something that has happened over and over again that I've witnessed myself that has been triggering for older people in the workplace, myself included, where it feels like Gen Z just doesn't understand that certain things have to be done. And it's such an outdated mindset for us to be thinking that anything has to be done. And for us to be able to embrace a willingness to look critically at some of these systems that we've all just taken for granted because they've always been that way, that's something that is going to be such an interesting shift for us to watch is to actually look at fresh eyes with our own systems and to be able to see like maybe that doesn't make sense anymore and maybe there are other ways for us to do it and to open space for that discussion and for that conversation in a way that I don't think would have been done previously.
No, and I think following on from that is companies creating opportunities for play and curiosity with things kind of intergenerational teams where you might have a Gen X who's like, okay, I can bring the institutional knowledge or the kind of experience and some of the expertise, but I want you to critique some of this, or which way are you looking at this that might be different that I'm completely missing because I'm so blinkered. And so again, it's that thing of we have opportunities here through some of these frustrations to actually turn them on their heads and see them as business opportunities, growth opportunities, and cultural opportunities, right? So that people on teams are feeling much more aligned.
Let's keep going on that because I love that. If we kind of zoom out a little bit, we're talking a lot about Gen Z and the leaders above them. But the reality is if we zoom out, we're talking about 5 different generations in the workforce at once right now. It's not just the one and the two. There's a lot going on. It's a really fascinating dynamic right now, and everyone has a different expectation, different communication styles, different values, and obviously, we're speaking of this. It can create a lot of tension, but it can also be an incredible source of creativity and a different way of doing things if leaders know how to bridge the gap. So, Rebekah, you just mentioned play and curiosity. What else are you seeing leaders do that can really foster that genuine understanding and the collaboration across generations?
I think a lot of it successfully is really rooted in empathy and the different ways that you can introduce or invite empathy. And this shows up in all different kinds of ways. One of the tensions that we've often seen in the workplace is between parents and non parents, for example, and kind of understanding some of the different challenges that when you have particularly young children, and you need to kind of factor that into the general juggle of your life. When you don't have that as a consideration, sometimes that can be hard to understand. I definitely didn't have as much empathy when I was younger for the working parents in my kind of work cohorts, as of course I did once I became having a child myself. And so I think it's taking the time out of day-to-day business. And maybe this is something that chief people officers and their teams are thinking about as well right now, as to how can we kind of invest in this time, invest in putting kind of opportunities together so that we can really enable our teams to take a moment in each other's shoes, whether that's through the work that they're actually delivering, which is different across different disciplines, or just being human beings and the different things that we're bringing to work. And I think that there's something really powerful when we start thinking about away days and the kind of longer term purpose really being weaved within culture. Nobody was doing this stuff 20 years ago for sure, because it wasn't seen as valuable. But I think for all of the reasons that we've been discussing, successful leaders are going to be those and are those who are already doing this that think, I do want to be thinking about this. And it's not just about, I'm thinking now about corporate well-being, what a massive business that is. But again, for a lot of people, a free yoga session a week is just seen as performative. What does it actually mean? And so it's putting the investment, the resources, the creativity and thinking into what are meaningful moments we can create perhaps over the course of a calendar year that actually we can measure and we can see are really kind of promoting empathy, but then translates into productivity and success for the double bottom line. Because, my work, as you know, is around the intersection of people, purpose, and profit. And it's all of them together. And so I think it's when we're approaching this through that lens, we can start to see some really, really exciting approaches.
Absolutely. I totally agree. I was nodding the entire time you were talking. The one thing that I would add to that is just the ability to experiment and leaders' willingness to be able to acknowledge when something is still in beta or when something still needs to be explored. So often leaders were expected to have everything figured out. And it's just not reasonable right now. It's not an expectation. None of us know what is going to be right around the corner. What we need to be able to really model as leaders is a tolerance for ambiguity and a willingness to be able to iterate or take the next right step and see what happens and then iterate again. That concept of being able to be more flexible, to be a little bit more nimble, and to be able to still keep the team organized and oriented around the core mission of what your organization is really oriented around, that can be your true north, even when all of these other things are starting to change around you. A leader's job is to avoid chaos. That is the one mission that every leader has, is to make sure that everyone is oriented around the same general organizing principles. And that can still be true when technology is changing, when the workforce is changing, when how we work is changing. And so finding ways to still be flexible, to still experiment, to still iterate while holding true to those core principles, I think is a really important tension that just further supports what you were saying about purpose and engagement and empathy.
Leah, that I'm kind of smirking because that's such a core fundamental truth that leaders' responsibility is to avoid chaos. But unfortunately, we're seeing so many leaders who are doing quite the opposite. And so there's a real moment for leadership and others to reflect just on that, actually, if that is their core role, and make sure that they're doing just that.
Power and leadership are not the same thing.
No.
Never been truer. Let's wrap it up there for today. We have another conversation coming after this one, but thank you so much, both of you. I feel like I've learned a lot of new things today, even though we've been having this conversation together for a while. And for our listeners, if you're ready to lead with intention and thrive in the face of change, we hope you'll join the conversation. We have a few other episodes in this series, and we would love for you to share your thoughts, connect with us, get the support that you need on your own journey. We are really focused on building a future where businesses don't just survive through this change and uncertainty, they thrive. So, in the show notes, we'll include links to other episodes in the series where you can find the three of us. And until next time, I'm Anique, and this is The New Terrain.